It was midnight, August. The screen glowed in the darkness as Chinedu's trembling fingers entered his examination number into the West African Examination Council's portal. After 3 years of scoring 0 in every single test, after being called stupid, cursed, hopeless. This was the moment of truth. The page loaded slowly, painfully slowly, and when the results finally appeared, what everyone saw was something that defied every law of academic possibility, something that would make teachers cry, that would go viral beyond imagination, that would prove the impossible was never really impossible at all.
Fair African Tales. Subscribe and turn on the bell for new stories.
In the bustling city of Lagos, where ambition rises like the morning sun over the Atlantic, there lived a boy named Chinedu Okafor. At 17 years old, he carried a burden heavier than the textbooks in his worn leather bag, a burden that pressed down on his shoulders every time he walked through the rusted gates of Memorial High School. 0. That's all anyone ever saw next to his name. 0 in mathematics, 0 in English, 0 in physics, 0 in chemistry. Even in subjects where partial credit seemed inevitable, Chinedu managed to score absolutely nothing. His teachers had grown weary of grading his papers. Some would simply write the number without even reading his answers. Others would shake their heads in disbelief, wondering how a student could attend classes for 3 years and learn absolutely nothing. "Perhaps he is cursed," whispered Mrs. Adiemi, the mathematics teacher, to her colleague during lunch break. "I have never seen anything like this in 30 years of teaching. Even students who sleep through my classes manage to guess correctly sometimes." But Chinedu wasn't cursed, at least not in the way they imagined. His story began long before he ever stepped foot in Memorial High School, in a small village near Enugu, where he had lived with his grandmother until he was 14. His parents had died when he was 7, victims of a terrible accident on the Enugu-Onitsha Expressway during a rainy season. His grandmother, Mama Naoma, had raised him with love, but little else. They had no electricity, no books, no television. By the time other children his age were learning multiplication tables, Chinedu was learning how to fetch water from the stream and tend to the cassava farm. When Mama Naoma fell ill, everything changed. His uncle, Mr. Thomas Okafor, a successful businessman in Lagos, came to the village for her funeral. He looked at Chinedu, this tall, quiet boy with intelligent eyes, and made a decision that would alter both their lives. "You will come to Lagos," he declared. "You will go to school. You will become somebody." Chinedu had nodded, not understanding what this meant, not knowing that he was about to be thrown into an ocean when he had never even learned to swim in a pond. Memorial High School was a prestigious institution, one of the best in Lagos. Students here competed for top universities, spoke English fluently, and carried smartphones their parents bought them for their birthdays. They had been studying since kindergarten, building knowledge brick by brick, year after year. Chinedu arrived in SS1, Senior Secondary 1, with the education level of a Primary 4 student from a remote village. The gap wasn't just wide, it was an abyss. His uncle meant well, but he didn't understand. Mr. Thomas had built his business through street smarts and determination. He had never finished secondary school himself. He thought all Chinedu needed was opportunity, a uniform, textbooks, and a roof over his head. He didn't realize that education was cumulative, that you couldn't understand algebra if you hadn't mastered basic arithmetic, that you couldn't write essays if you barely knew grammar. So Chinedu sat in classes where teachers spoke rapidly, referencing concepts he had never heard of, building on foundations he didn't have. When Mr. Okonkwo taught quadratic equations, Chinedu was still struggling to understand fractions. When Mrs. Johnson discussed Shakespearean literature, Chinedu was trying to figure out what a metaphor was. The other students would laugh sometimes, not cruelly, but in genuine surprise, when Chinedu asked questions that revealed the depths of what he didn't know. Did he just ask what the solar system is? In SS2, whispered Amara to her friend during physics class. The zeros began to pile up like debts that could never be repaid. First term of SS1, 0 in everything. Second term, the same. Third term, identical results. His teachers called his uncle. "Mr. Okafor, we are concerned about your nephew. Perhaps he needs special education. Perhaps he has learning disabilities. We recommend you take him to a doctor." His uncle's disappointment was palpable. The man had spent good money on school fees, uniforms, books. He had expected gratitude, delivered in the form of excellent grades. Instead, he got zeros and embarrassment. "Are you stupid?" he would shout at Chinedu. "Am I wasting my money? Your mates are passing. Why can't you pass?" Chinedu had no answer. He would retreat to the small room he shared with his uncle's houseboy, David, and stare at textbooks that might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics. He tried. God knows he tried. He would stay up late, reading by torchlight when the power went out, attempting to make sense of words and numbers that danced mockingly across the pages. But without foundation, without context, without anyone to guide him through the basics, his efforts were like trying to build a house by starting with the roof. David, the houseboy, was the only person who showed him kindness. At 19, David had dropped out of school in SS2 to help his family, but he remembered enough to recognize Chinedu's struggle. "Oga Chinedu," he would say gently. "This thing where you day read, you understand, When Chinedu shook his head, David would try to explain in simple terms, breaking down concepts into pieces Chinedu could digest. Those moments were the only light in Chinedu's darkness. By SS2, Chinedu had become invisible. He sat at the back of every class, a ghost in school uniform. Teachers no longer called on him. Students no longer mocked him. They had all simply accepted that Chinedu Okafor was that boy, the one who scored 0, the one who would never amount to anything. He had become a fixture, like the broken desk in the corner or the clock that never told the right time. But something was happening inside Chinedu, something no one could see. Every 0, every disappointed look, every whispered comment, they weren't breaking him, they were forging him. In the quiet of his small room, in the humiliation of failed tests, in the weight of his uncle's disapproval, a fire was being lit. It started as a tiny ember, barely visible, fed by a question that kept him awake at night. What if I could prove them all wrong? The impossible began with a single decision. It was a Saturday morning in November, the beginning of SS3, his final year. Chinedu woke up at 5 a.m., not because anyone told him to, but because he had made a choice the night before. He would start from the beginning, not from SS3 work, not even from SS1, but from primary school. He would teach himself everything he had missed, every foundation he lacked, every concept he needed. He had 10 months until the final examinations, 10 months to accomplish what seemed impossible. David found him that morning, sitting on the floor with a stack of his cousin's old primary school textbooks that he had found in a storage box. "Oga Chinedu, wetin you dey do?" Chinedu looked up. And David saw something in his eyes he had never seen before, determination that burned like the Lagos sun at noon. "I am starting again," Chinedu said simply, "from the beginning." What followed were months of the most intense self-education anyone could imagine. Chinedu created a schedule that would have broken most people. He woke at 4:30 every morning and studied for 2 hours before school. During break time, while others played football or gossiped, he sat under the mango tree with his books. After school, instead of going home, he would stay in the library until it closed at 6. Then he would go home, eat quickly, and study until midnight. 4.5 hours of sleep, then repeat. He started with primary 4 mathematics, learning basic arithmetic properly for the first time in his life. Addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. He mastered them all before moving forward. He learned fractions, decimals, percentages. Each concept was a battle, but he won them one by one. David helped when he could, explaining things in pidgin English and using examples from daily life. "See this, Gary? If we want share 'em for 4 people, how we go do Mathematics suddenly made sense. English was harder because it required immersion. Chinedu began to read everything he could find, newspapers, novels, even the backs of product packages. He listened carefully to how the news anchors on television spoke, mimicking their pronunciation in whispers. He wrote sentences over and over, learning grammar through repetition and pattern recognition. His exercise books filled with practice paragraphs, each one slightly better than the last. For science subjects, he started with basic concepts. What is matter? What is energy? What is a cell? He built understanding brick by brick, molecule by molecule. When he didn't understand something, he would spend hours on it, approaching it from different angles until something clicked. The school library became his sanctuary, and the old librarian, Mr. Amadi, began to notice this boy who came every day, this boy who read with the hunger of someone starving. "Young man," Mr. Amadi said one afternoon, "I see you here every day. You are reading primary school books, but you are in SS3. Why?" Chinedu hesitated, shame colouring his cheeks. But then he told the truth. He explained everything, his background, the zeros, the impossible gap he was trying to bridge. Mr. Amadi listened without interruption, and when Chinedu finished, the old man nodded slowly. "You know what I see? I see someone who has already accomplished the impossible. Most people give up. You are still fighting. Come, let me show you something." Mr. Amadi took him to a section of the library Chinedu had never explored. These are simplified textbooks meant for adult learners who miss their education. They will help you. He pulled out books that explained SS1, SS2, and SS3 concepts in clearer, more accessible language. "Take them, study them, and Chinedu." The old man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't tell yourself that you cannot do this. The mind believes what you tell it." The first term examinations of SS3 came in December. Chinedu had been studying intensely for 6 weeks. He sat for the exams, knowing he had learned more in those 6 weeks than in his entire time at Memorial High School. But had he learned enough? The mathematics paper had questions on topics he had covered. He attempted every question, his hand steady despite his racing heart. When the results came back in January, something unprecedented happened. Chinedu Okafor scored 15 out of 100 in mathematics, not 0, 15. The mathematics teacher, Mrs. Adeyemi, had to check twice to make sure she hadn't made an error. She called Chinedu aside after class. "Did you cheat?" she asked bluntly. Chinedu looked her in the eyes. No, Ma, I studied. She studied his face, searching for deception, but found only quiet dignity. Well, she said finally, it is still failing, but it is not zero. Do you know what this means? Chinedu nodded. It meant that the impossible was beginning to happen. News of Chinedu's 15 spread through the school like wildfire. The boy who always scored 0 had scored something. Some students laughed. 15 is still failure nah, they said. But others saw what it really represented. Proof that change was possible. Evidence that someone could rewrite their story even when it seemed too late. Chinedu didn't celebrate. 15 was not his goal. He went back to his schedule with renewed intensity. He had 8 months until the final WAEC examinations. 8 months to turn 15 into 50 into 70 into passing. The ember inside him had become a flame. In February, during the second term examinations, Chinedu scored 28 in mathematics, 20 in English, 18 in physics, 22 in chemistry, and 25 in biology. No zeros, not a single 0. His total average was still failing, but the trajectory was clear. He was rising. His teachers began to pay attention. Mrs. Adeyemi started staying after class to answer his questions. Mr. Okonkwo, the physics teacher, noticed the intensity with which Chinedu listened to every word and began to explain concepts more carefully. Even Mrs. Johnson, who taught literature, started recommending books that might help him understand the texts they were studying. They saw something they rarely witnessed: genuine transformation, authentic determination, a student literally fighting for his future. His uncle noticed too, though he was skeptical. "Let me see you pass WAEC first before I believe anything," Mr. Thomas grumbled. But there was less anger in his voice now, replaced by cautious curiosity. Who was this nephew who suddenly seemed to care? David was Chinedu's biggest supporter. He would wake up at 4:30 just to make sure Chinedu got up, bringing him hot tea before his morning study session. "You go make Oga Chinedu," he would say with confidence. "I dey see for your eye. You go shock all of them." But the road remained brutally difficult. There were nights when Chinedu cried in frustration, when concepts refused to make sense no matter how many times he read them. There were moments when he wanted to give up, when the voice in his head whispered that he was fooling himself, that someone like him could never catch up. In those moments, he would remember where he started, a village boy who knew nothing, sitting in a classroom where everyone else knew everything. He had come so far already. He couldn't stop now. March brought the mock examinations, a practice run before the actual WAEC. These exams were notoriously difficult, designed to prepare students for the real thing. Chinedu approached them with everything he had learned. For 5 days, he wrote exams from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. His hand cramping from the constant writing, his mind stretched to its absolute limits. When the results came back in early April, something extraordinary happened. Chinedu scored 45 in mathematics, 42 in English, 38 in physics, 48 in chemistry, and 50 in biology. He had passed biology. After 3 years of zeros, after months of inhuman effort, Chinedu Okafor had passed a subject. The day Mrs. Johnson announced the results, the classroom fell silent when she called his name. Chinedu Okafor, Biology 50. For a moment, no one reacted. Then Emeka, one of the top students in the class, started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. It wasn't mockery or sarcasm. It was genuine respect. They had all watched Chinedu's journey from the shadows, and even those who had laughed at him before understood the magnitude of what he had accomplished. Chinedu sat at his desk, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of sadness, but of something far more powerful. Tears of someone who had touched the impossible and found it solid beneath his fingers. Mr. Amadi, the librarian, shook his hand that afternoon. "You are proving something important, Chinedu. You are proving that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. Now you have 2 months until SSCE, Senior Secondary School Certificate Examination. Can you push even harder?" Chinedu nodded. He had come too far to stop now. The final 2 months before WAEC were a blur of textbooks, practice questions, and past examination papers. Chinedu barely slept, barely ate. His uncle, seeing the transformation, stopped complaining about the electricity bill from Chinedu's late-night studying. David helped quiz him, asking questions from textbooks, even though he didn't always understand the answers. Mrs. Adeyemi stayed after school 3 times a week to give him extra mathematics lessons, refusing payment. "You are teaching me something too," she told him. "You are reminding me why I became a teacher." The other students began to study harder too. Chinedu's transformation had created a ripple effect. If the boy who scored 0 could pass, what excuse did anyone else have? The whole atmosphere of the classroom changed. Competition became collaboration. Students who had never spoken to Chinedu before started studying with him, realizing that his unique perspective, learning everything fresh, sometimes gave him insights they had missed. Amara, the girl who had once mocked him, approached him one day during break. "Chinedu, can you help me with this biology question? I know it sounds crazy, but you explain things in a way that makes sense." He helped her, and in helping her, he reinforced his own understanding. Teaching, he discovered, was learning twice. May arrived, bringing with it SSCE, Senior Secondary School Certificate Examination, the West African Examinations Council exams that would determine every student's future. These were the exams that opened doors to universities, to opportunities, to life itself. For 3 weeks, students across Nigeria sat in examination halls, their futures hanging on their ability to answer questions correctly. Chinedu walked into the examination hall on the first day with his heart pounding like a drum. He had come so far from the boy who scored 0, but was it enough? Had 10 months of impossible effort been sufficient to bridge a gap that had taken others 12 years to cross? He said a prayer, the same one Mama Neoma used to say, "Chineke, God of possibilities, let this day favor me." The mathematics paper was first. Chinedu looked at the questions and felt a surge of recognition. He knew these concepts. He had studied them, practiced them, lived them for 10 months. His pencil moved across the paper with confidence he had never felt before. He attempted every question, showing all his workings, applying every formula he had memorized. When the 3 hours ended, he had filled every page. English came next, then physics, chemistry, biology, and the other subjects. Each examination was a battle, but Chinedu fought with everything he had. He drew on every lesson from Mrs. Adeyemi, every explanation from David, every simplified textbook from Mr. Amadi, every hour of sleep he had sacrificed. This was it. This was what the impossible looked like when you refused to accept it. The examinations ended in late May. Now came the hardest part, waiting. The West Africa Examination Council results typically came out in August, 3 months of not knowing whether the impossible had truly happened or whether he had fallen short. Chinedu tried to stay busy, helping David with household chores, reading novels for pleasure for the first time in his life, trying not to obsess over every question he thought he might have gotten wrong. His uncle was kinder now, seeing how hard Chinedu had worked. "No matter what happens," Mr. Thomas said one evening, "I want you to know that I see your effort. That counts for something." It was the closest thing to an apology Chinedu would get, and he accepted it with grace. The other students had moved on, enjoying their post-examination freedom, making plans for university. But they remembered Chinedu. When they gathered to reminisce about SS3, his name always came up. Remember how he used to score 0? Remember how he passed biology in the mocks? His story had become part of Memorial High School's legend. August came with rain and anticipation. The West African Examination Council results were released online at midnight on a Wednesday. Chinedu couldn't sleep. At 11:30 p.m. he sat in front of his uncle's laptop, hands shaking. David sat beside him, equally nervous. "I go be well, Oga Chinedu. I dey feel am for my spirit." Midnight struck. The website to check the result crashed from too much traffic. Chinedu refreshed again and again. Finally, at 12:40 a.m., the page loaded. He entered his examination number with trembling fingers. The screen seemed to take forever to load. Then there it was, his result. Mathematics, C6, English, C5, Physics, C6, Chemistry, B3, Biology, B3, Government, C4, Economics, C5, Literature, C6. Chinedu Okafor had not just passed. He had passed everything. He had earned credits. He qualified for university admission. The boy who scored 0 in every test for 3 years straight had achieved what everyone, including himself in his darkest moments, had believed was impossible. He stared at the screen, unable to process what he was seeing. David looked over his shoulder, saw the grades, and started shouting. "Oga Chinedu don pass. He don pass everything. Jesus Christ!" The shouting woke up Mr. Thomas, who came running downstairs thinking something was wrong. When he saw the results on the screen, he stood frozen, then pulled Chinedu into a hug that said everything his words couldn't. The news spread through Memorial High School like wildfire the next morning. Teachers gathered in the staff room, looking at the results in disbelief. Mrs. Adeyemi cried when she saw that Chinedu had scored C6 in her mathematics class. "From 0 to C6 in 10 months, she whispered. "I have never seen anything like this in my life." Students called each other, spreading the news. Chinedu passed. Chinedu got credits. Some rushed to his house to congratulate him. Amara came with a group of classmates, and they celebrated in the small living room, laughing and talking about the journey they had all witnessed. Even Mr. Okonkwo, the strict physics teacher, came by that evening. "Young man," he said, shaking Chinedu's hand firmly, "you have taught us all something invaluable. You have shown us that it is never too late, that determination can overcome almost any obstacle. I will tell your story to every class I teach from now on." The local community newspaper heard about Chinedu's story and sent a reporter. "From 0 to hero, student achieves the impossible," read the headline. They interviewed him, Mrs. Adeyemi, David, and Mr. Amadi. The article went viral on Nigerian social media, inspiring thousands of students across the country who felt they were too far behind to catch up. Chinedu received messages from strangers telling him that his story had given them hope, had made them believe that change was possible. But the true impact of Chinedu's story wasn't measured in newspaper articles or social media shares. It was measured in the choices people made afterward. Mrs. Adeyemi started a special tutoring program for struggling students, approaching teaching with new empathy. Mr. Thomas became a sponsor for village children who wanted to study in Lagos. Understanding now that opportunity alone wasn't enough, guidance was necessary too. David went back to school, inspired by Chinedu to complete his education. He enrolled in evening classes, determined to get his own West African Examination Council certificate. Memorial High School created the Chinedu Okafor Award for Most Improved Student, given annually to the student who showed the greatest academic growth regardless of their final grades. The first recipient was a quiet girl named Blessing, who had struggled with mathematics her entire life, but improved by 30 marks in 1 year. She received the award with tears in her eyes, saying that Chinedu's story had made her believe she could improve too. As for Chinedu himself, he gained admission to study chemistry at the University of Lagos. His grades weren't high enough for medicine or engineering, the prestigious courses, but he didn't care. He had proven the impossible was possible, and that was worth more than any prestigious degree. On his first day at the university, he walked through the gates with his head held high, no longer the boy who scored 0, but the young man who rewrote his entire story through sheer force of will. Years later, when Professor Chinedu Okafor stood before his own chemistry students at Memorial High School, where he had returned to teach, he would tell them his story. He would show them his old report cards, the ones filled with zeros, then show them his West African Examination Council result. "I am not telling you this to brag," he would say. "I am telling you this so you understand that your current situation is not your final destination. I scored 0 for 3 years straight. 0. Not 5 marks, not 10 marks. 0. Everyone gave up on me. Worse, I almost gave up on myself. But something inside refused to accept that zeros defined who I was." He would pause, letting that sink in, then continue. "The impossible is only impossible until someone does it. Then it becomes a roadmap for everyone else. I will not lie to you and say it was easy. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I cried, I wanted to quit. There were nights I questioned my sanity. But every small victory, every mark above 0, every concept that finally made sense, they kept me going. And eventually, small impossibilities added up to one big miracle." His students would listen, especially those at the back who felt lost, who felt too far behind to ever catch up, and they would see hope in his eyes. Because Chinedu Okafor understood what it meant to be at the bottom, to be written off, to be considered hopeless. And he also understood what it meant to climb back up, one painful step at a time. The story of the student who scored 0 in every test until the impossible finally happened became more than just Chinedu's story. It became a reminder that human potential is not fixed, that circumstances at birth do not dictate destiny, that 10 months of focused effort can overcome years of disadvantage. It proved that the word impossible is often just a challenge in disguise, waiting for someone stubborn enough, determined enough, and brave enough to prove it wrong. And somewhere in Lagos, in a small room in a modest house, an old exercise book remains, filled with Chinedu's practice problems from those 10 months of transformation. On the first page, written in his own hand, are words he wrote to himself on that November morning when he decided to start again. "I may not know where this journey ends, but I know I am tired of zeros. Today I begin to become someone different. Today I choose the impossible." That choice changed everything, not just for Chinedu, but for everyone who heard his story and decided that maybe, just maybe, their own impossibilities were not as permanent as they seemed. Because if a boy who scored 0 for 3 years straight could pass WAEC with credits, what excuse did anyone else have for not trying? The impossible had happened, and in happening, it became possible for everyone else too. This is the story of Chinedu Okafor, the student who got 0 in every test, until the impossible finally happened. And it serves as eternal proof that with enough determination, enough sacrifice, and enough refusal to accept defeat, even the most impossible dreams can become reality. The zeros may mark where you start, but they never have to define where you finish.
Subscribe for more amazing African stories.